in that archive that you found?
So the question was, did I find plays that she wrote? Her plays actually were written when she was in high school and college, and she's known as the first published Asian American woman playwright. And her plays, one of them actually got republished in Bamboo Ridge Press, and I think they're all available on Alexander Street. So your university library should have them. Actually, one of her plays, which is called The Submission of Rose Moy, is still being produced. There is an Asian American drama department. I think it's in Santa Cruz, and a professor there was having a student production group put on The Submission of Rose Moy. So I learned that when I was doing research on her film. Does anybody else have a question? Cliff?
When did you start filming this?
So I started researching for a character to be in my first feature documentary. By the way, this is an email sign-up sheet. I'm just going to leave it here. So I had done a couple of short films before this, and I knew that I wanted to feature a Chinese woman in my first feature documentary, and I didn't have one in mind. Actually, there was a really kind of wake-up call about how much of a void there is in mass media and academia, really, about Chinese women in history. And so a friend of mine had given me these vintage mystery novels that were out of print. And they were written by a Caucasian woman, but they feature a Chinese-American female detective. And she's fabulous. She's very much like Ling, very smart, audacious, independent. And she was the detective was supposed to have been based on a real-life woman. And she solves crimes in New York and in Hawaii, mostly in Hawaii. So I figured the author had lived in Hawaii in the 30s, that she must have been inspired by Chinese women like Ling living in Hawaii in the 30s. So that's, in 2008, I decided to try to figure out who those Chinese women might have been. And then it took me about a year to come across the memoir that Ling wrote, because in these mystery novels, one of the characters is a female doctor, a Chinese female doctor. And I thought, there can't have been that many Chinese female doctors in Hawaii in the 30s. So I started researching who those were, and Ling's memoir popped up, because it's really all about her parents, who were both doctors. So that I found, that led me to Ling, the beginning, I think it was the beginning of 2009. And then at the, let's see, it was the end of 2009 is when I found the film. So that's when I knew I could make a film about the film and her.
But she passed away in 2003?
I just missed her, yeah. She passed away in 2003. I actually, like you saw in the movie, I worked in New York City. I lived in New York City from 1985 to 1997. She was there the whole time I was there. And I worked 3 blocks away from where she lived. So I wasn't a filmmaker at that time, but I certainly, I worked in the book publishing industry. I collected Asian American literature. I don't know why I never knew about her. I never read her memoir. So it was really a case of, I kept feeling like I just missed her. It really haunted me that I never met her. And I think that's one of the reasons why I kept on searching for so much stuff, because I had this really great sense of loss that I didn't know her when she was alive. And this has kind of driven me to encourage everyone who has stories that are important to their families, to their communities, to document them and to pass them on to make sure that they get carried forward. Because I think, our ancestors, our people before us can teach us so much. I've learned so much from dead women that I never met. Any other questions?
Is the Kukan movie, it's not the whole movie, the of it?
So, how much of Kukan got restored? Well, that's a good question. So one of the interesting things that we found out while doing the film is that the reels that the sons inherited from their father, Ray Scott, weren't the full film. Fortunately and unfortunately, Ray Scott, before he died in the 1980s, he passed away, he had his film, the full film, transferred to VHS tape. And at the time, that was the state of the art. So apparently, we theorized that after he got it transferred to VHS, either the lab threw away that print or he threw away the print. Or it got lost somehow when he passed away and all of his stuff got gone through, whatever. But none of the sons, when I contacted them and said, those reels are not the full print, does anyone of you have another print? None of them remember any other reels besides that reel. And then the crazy thing is that although they all had been given a VHS tape, none of them could find their VHS tape. So that was really alarming. But one of the nieces had one. Ray Scott's niece, who's older, requested one, and she knew exactly where hers was. So we transferred that and digitized that first. And then the oldest son found the master VHS copy that Ray Scott had made in his basement. And it had their father's handwriting on it, it had the year, so we knew exactly what year. He had it transferred in 1987. And that's what's on this. So the DVD copy of my film includes the full 85-minute Kukan, mastered from VHS. So it's not super sharp. The 16mm print from the National Archives is also on this. We also digitized it and put it on as an extra feature. And the image quality is much better. It's much more clear and sharp. But the VHS footage of the bombing of Chongqing you saw in my film. So it's very recognizable. You can recognize people's faces. It's just a little fuzzy. So it was not high enough quality for the Academy to continue doing a preservation job on it. Because the way the Academy preserves films is they digitize them at a really high resolution and then they put them back out to film stock. So it wasn't logical to do it that way. But you can still, I'm trying to get DVDs into the libraries because it's a way of not just carrying the Ling Ai story forward, but also to ensure that Kukan survives into the next generation.
So the only place that Ling Ai appears in that film is that short little snippet that you showed in the film. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. Although I was positive for so long that she went to China with Ray Scott because I actually saw a newspaper article where there's a Chinese woman in khakis who looks exactly like her standing next to Ray Scott and was taken in China. And for the longest time I had this theory that she went to China with Ray. And then when I couldn't find any of the ship records that could back that up or anything, and then I also found letters from her sister indicating that she spent much more time with Ray Scott and helped Ray Scott while she was in China. So this is her sister, Betty, who was the doctor. And Betty and Ling Ai looked very much alike when they were young. So I realized that that photo must have been Betty. But for the longest time, I was combing the Kukan footage, the bad VHS copy that we had access to try to see if Ling Ai showed up in any of the footage. And I couldn't find her in any of the other footage.
So does that mean he consciously spliced her into the film because he wanted her there, or I mean?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. He was always, so I have to give Ray Scott credit in interviews, he was always trying to give Ling Ai credit and to say, well, she did a lot for the film wouldn't have been made without her. And possibly it was an homage to her, possibly they just needed, were editing together all the snippets of film he had and the editor didn't realize it wasn't taken in China, and it was an American woman, or maybe she she loved being a part of everything, so maybe she said, hey, put that in. I don't know. It's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm just sort of struck by how this documentary is the sort of thing that often inspires some sort of, biopic type of, Hollywood film, but the fact that you took it to China, and I was definitely tearing up during the scene where you're showing it in Chongqing for the first time, that they have a huge growing film interest and industry. More screens are coming up every day there, that their film, a film that they produce there would want to maybe center on her because of her Chineseness, and they're interested in film. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how you would feel about someone trying to say, hey, this could be a good, fictional kind of property of sort of like a biopic. Have you ever thought about that? Because they're always rating documentary films for iTunes.
Actually, no, remember your name?
Sasha Bogle.
Sasha.
Yeah.
Sasha, actually, a Hollywood company did approach me, and I am working on a screenplay.
There you go. Okay.
However, there's an interesting thing about China. I'm discovering. I mean, that was my first trip to China, and I didn't study Chinese history, but the Chinese government and the Chinese scholars were really anxious to get their hands on Kukan, and they still prize it as a really important part of their history. However, because it has Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader, in it, and it promotes him, government is communist, and Xi Jinping is really trying to nationalize the country and is clamping down on dissidents and things. My film, which is, so one of the things is interesting, let me go back. When they put out Kukan, they censored out parts with Chiang Kai-shek. Mm-hmm. They censored those parts out in China. And then my film, I'm trying to get to China, and it hasn't been in any of the Chinese film festivals. There are a few big ones. And a film scholar who's in China said that the reason probably is because my film is about a Chinese American, and I'm a Chinese American. And even though it's Chinese, we're still considered foreigners, and foreigners are not good right now.
If you try finding Kukan in Taiwan, it might work since they don't censor stuff, unlike China.
So Taiwan's, I also tried to get into Taiwan. I haven't, not as strongly, but I haven't had much success there. But I'm hoping that through academic channels that it'll eventually be shown in both Taiwan and in China. But the big film festivals, which are controlled by the Chinese government, didn't accept the film, my film. So it's interesting. You would think, they love this story, and I think the populace. So when we went to China and brought Kukan to China, there are lots of newspaper articles and things about the film and about me, and I think that there is an interest amongst the populace, but everything, not everything, but a lot more than you think is controlled by the central government. So. Any other questions? I just wanted to say, it's not in the film, an interesting story about the interview that Ling appears in when she's 85 years old. Was actually an interview that was taken for a Robert Ripley, Believe It or Not, show on Turner Broadcasting. And fortunately, Ling was a great self-promoter, and she was a great letter writer. So I was able to read a lot of her letters to her nieces and nephews, and she bragged about being on, I'm going to be on TV and watch them. So I knew there was this program out, and I found a VHS copy of it, and I saw it. She's in like 20 seconds of it. And I was able to contact the post-production manager and track down the raw interview tapes from that show. And for archival people, it was stored in a salt mine in Kansas. That's how random this is. And I don't think stations archive their stuff anymore because it's all digital, but these were on beta tapes, and there were 2 hours worth of interview tapes with her. And so that was wonderful. I was so happy that she liked to talk and that she wanted to tell her story. So they would ask her questions about Robert Ripley, and she would launch into a story about Kukan and how she made it with Ray Scott and how she went to the White House.
Yeah.
And the interviewers told me later, I talked to one of them, that they thought she was a little cuckoo because they had never heard of all this stuff, and it just sounded like she was an old lady telling wild stories.
Right.
So anyway, it just makes me realize that, you know, our history is so slanted by, you know, what's kept, what's not kept, what's put in the shows. The only reason why she got to tell her story is because she was associated with a famous man. So it's so hard for women's stories and minority stories to survive past a generation because of this.
Right, and your screenplay will sell because it features, there's a great heroic white guy.
We are not making him the hero.
Hopefully Scarlett
That's
Johansson.
why I'm trying to tackle a screenplay because I don't want them to Hollywoodize
Exactly.
the story,
Right,
and
that's
she would not permit it. She's still haunting me. She said
I love
she
the
will
nephew
permit
too,
that.
because it's kind of like she's not acting like the classic Chinese femininity that maybe you could say, well, she was a little loud, maybe she was such a character, right? Like a broad, you know, talking in that 30s kind of thick, like, maybe he was like, she was a little loud. Maybe the family jewels was it.
Well, half her family still doesn't like her and didn't want to be involved in my film.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, but that's family, you know,
Right.
any big family. But
I feel the same.
yeah, that's a good question. So these are available through New Day Films, my educational distributor. I don't have personal copies of my film. This is the deluxe edition with Kukan on it. But if they're private citizens who, you know, aren't planning to teach with it or show it in libraries, whatever, I'm selling personal copies for $60. So I'll have a few at the Visual Communications ADOC table. I'll be there this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon. So people want to buy this, they can buy it.
That's the one that has it.
This one has Kukan, yeah.
Okay.
And-
And that's for educators too? This
This is for educators. If educators want to buy it, it's a much higher price because it comes with public performance rights to educators. So through New Day Films, my educational distribution company, the film's being sold to nonprofits, educational institutions, and libraries. And that sale includes public performance rights, meaning you can show it to classes as long as you don't charge public showings of it. But there are a few people who really want to see Kukan, and then they purchase the DVD through me. So that you can do. Also, I wanted to alert educators that we just put out a viewer's guide with a lot of background information about the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Sino-Japanese War, information about early documentary Academy Awards, and more information about Ling. So that's a great resource. That's on our website, findingkukan.com. And the last announcement is that we will be on PBS America Reframed on May 8th. And that's on PBS World Channel. It's not everybody gets, but please alert your friends about it. I'm really trying to make sure this story is a word-of-mouth story, because who's heard of Kukan and who's heard of Ling? So it's really a word-of-mouth story that has to
I
build
just
from the grassroots up.
Thank you for the work you did. It must have been quite a journey. 8 years, you said?
Yeah, 8 years total, and then I've been on the road with it for a year and a half. So.
Wow.
I
Now
have-
you're just starting out?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm
What's your name?
My name is Sabara Kashi. I'm actually making a personal film about being Iranian American.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I presented earlier this morning.
Oh, too bad.
in Tana. So, I'm just curious, what sources of funding did you find for your film?
I started with a Hawaii Humanities grant. It was a very small 2,500 research grants. So that's what got me started, and I had plumbed some archives that I thought might have stuff on Ling, and they all did. So that, I kind of did a frog hopping research thing. One archive led me to another, and then the production funding, a lot of it, the initial ones came from a Kickstarter campaign. And then I started applying to all of the usual suspects film grants, and I didn't really get any of them, except I was able to get an NEA grant to produce the shadow scenes with a San Francisco production company that does theatrical work. And I had partnered with them, so we put in a grant together, and that's how we got the shadow scenes produced.
Not even CAM?
CAM came in to acquire the film at the end when it was finished, and that's how it's getting on America Reframed. But yeah, it's tough because I was also a first-time feature director and didn't have a track record with CAM. So, and then I also wanted to do innovative stuff that they questioned, like the shadow scenes was always risky to them. They, yeah. So it was a long haul funding, but I had a lot of support from unknown people. Would hear about the story, non-film funders. Like I have private foundation money, quite a lot of private foundation money, and that came from really like talking to people at cocktail parties about my film, and then they refer me to somebody else. And a World War II historian who lives in Hawaii and is also fourth generation Chinese American had a private foundation, and he loved the story, and he came in with a small amount first, and then we kept on talking. He's the one who actually told me to go to China. He's like, you can't not go to China. That's ridiculous. And he helped fund my trip to China, and then he came in with a lot of the finishing funds. So that's it's just a lot of patchwork funding. So yeah, you have to be persistent or lucky to get all your funding quickly, I think. Even veteran filmmakers say that. But good luck. It sounds like a very timely and wonderful film. Yeah, we'll have to talk more.
That's almost the same as trying to add Chinese subtitles.
Oh, what was your name?
I'm Will.
Will?
Yeah.
Thanks
Oh.
for
Thank you. I enjoyed your film.
Sorry.
I didn't, but I'll
Thanks for watching.